Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I have gathered together my Nobile hybrids because this subject just keeps coming up, basically. Now, unfortunately, all of my Nobiles are behaving themselves at the moment, so they're all at the stage they should be for the time of year. And that includes the one that was totally out of season last year. It's managed to kick back in during this growing season. So unless it does anything obscure, it's going to behave itself. I'll just go over what I mean by out of season. The Nobile hybrids are available for sale virtually throughout the year. That's not their natural blooming season. Even though they're hybrids, they still have some inherent traits, which includes late winter, spring blooming. That's their normal point at which they bloom. However, if you buy one in August in full bloom, that would be classed as out of season, which, depending on, it's all very well, the blooms will be the trait that you think of it as being out of season, when really that's just luck of the draw. What determines the next year is where the growths are. Now, if you buy a plant with some shiny new growths at the base of the plant in August, they're not going to mature before the end of the season. Yeah? So on a mature plant, immature growths going into winter, this is the bit where you have to decide, what am I going to do? Am I going to continue growing on my new growths, which may reduce my blooms the following year? I doubt if it'll stop them, but it could reduce the number, and it could produce blooms at an odd time again. Or do I pull the resources out of that plant as it heads into winter and rest it, at which point those new growths will probably stall and never fully mature? But then you've got to ask yourself, why am I resting it? Because when you bought it in bloom, the mature growths have already bloomed. They might put a few blooms out in some odd places the following year, but otherwise they're not going to bloom again. So why are you resting it? You've got to ask yourself, what am I expecting to get from resting this plant? Right, so various stages you can go through autumn into winter. And one that's out of season, you've got to ask yourself, what am I going to get out of trying to rest it? The other thing you need to ask yourself is, can I rest it? Now, people who grow in homes and apartments and things like that might not be able to do what would be classed as a proper winter rest. And with the Nobile hybrids, it's probably not going to make much difference. I'll go over what the rest really should involve, and you may be able to do all of it. You may only be able to do some of it. You might not be able to do much of it at all. And with Nobile hybrids that are in season, chances are they're going to bloom anyway. So you could ask yourself, why am I fussing with the flipping things? Right, let's have a look at some. This is one you probably either never seen or only a very long time ago. And I'll have to do a pop-up with the name because it hasn't got a tag and I've forgotten it. Now, I've owned the plant donkey's years, but the mother plant was very strange. It would not grow from the base, ever. It never did from the time I got it. All it did was produce kikis. Kikis went off to other people now and again, and one of them I kept. The mother plant went to somebody else to have a go with the flipping thing, and that's so long ago I haven't got a clue who that plant went to. So this originated as a kiki. You can see where it was broken off, and that's all it was. And then it gradually started to grow until such point as there's enough strength in that plant now. If it wants to bloom next year, I will let it. And the only reason this is still with me is because of those blooms. They are pretty special. So that's one that's been grown on from a kiki. I don't really, because I can't remember what the mother plant looked like, I don't know how big it's actually ever going to get. But it's now behaving itself. It produced a new growth at the start of the season, which has grown on and matured terminal leaf. So it's finished growing for the year, yeah? So this one can just go into autumn, you know, as it should do. I haven't got any worries with that. If it tries to bloom next year, I will let it. It's strong enough now. If it goes mad with the blooms, I might knock some off and just leave a few so that we get to see them again. Coffee needed. Starting to croak. Now, growth habit of Nobiles tends to be upright, providing it's given the right nutrients and it's got inner strength. If it's got that, then the new growths will grow upright and they'll stay there. It is a naturally upright growing plant. Yeah, I'll cover another subject in a minute that comes up now and again as well. So it will naturally grow upright. Sometimes the canes get so fat and heavy near the top that they will pull away from the upright position like this one has. At that point you might want to just strap them back up again. That's personal taste. It's not necessary. The plant is growing as it wants to. Right, so you can mount them. Here's one that's mounted. Ooh. Now this again started life as a Kiki from Rachel. When I bought my holy clay pots, there was a little Kiki tucked in there. And that is Comet King, a very well-known Nobile hybrid with very, very attractive blooms that I nearly lost and the flipping thing wouldn't grow. Well, it is now. Last year it grew that second-sized leafed cane and some roots, and I thought at last it started to grow. Now this year it did actually try and bloom. This year it's grown a larger cane. That's still not full size. I know Comet King can get a lot larger than that, but nonetheless it's a lot better than before. It's also grown some roots and is still doing so. This is an active root system. There are green tips on these roots. It's still growing. Would that stop me resting it? No. Am I going to rest it? Yes, because it's now got 2 good-sized bulbs and I'd like to see some blooms. So this one, it's finished growing, terminal leaf. Oh, that's the previous year's growth, so we don't need to worry about that. But again, that terminal leaf, it's got a look about it. Usually a fraction smaller than the leaf next to it, and it does tend to stick upright instead of the alternate look that the Nobiles have got. We'll go into that. People often ask me if I've got a no ID thing, how do I tell what type of Dendrobium it is? The Nobiles have a distinctive look. Now other types of Dendrobiums can look similar, don't get me wrong, it's not unique. But you tend to have alternate leaves, that's a must, yeah? And where you get a node with a leaf, the opposite side to that leaf is where the bloom comes out, yeah? And that is a distinctive trait. The blooms don't come out where the leaf is, they come out the other side to the leaf. Therefore, the blooms come out alternately up the cane, yeah? And they form clusters. Some Nobiles have 1 giant flower, some have 3 or 4 smaller ones. Some have 3 or 4 quite large ones. And they almost obscure the cane and the leaves, they're so big. But that's a distinctive look. Very small at the base, getting wider and wider as you get towards the middle, heading towards the top, and then narrowing slightly again at the top. So that's what the canes look like. And even on smaller old canes that were weak, they've still got that look about them. Gradually those sheaths, the coverings on the cane, will fade and turn a straw colour and appear dead. And at that point often the canes themselves will go a lighter green colour. So that's their look. How big they are, how long's a piece of string? There are some smallish ones and some giants. So that's Comet King. That's behaving itself. It's grown nicely this year. It's now got a more than adequate root system for the size of the plant. So you can be allowed to bloom a bit next year, should you choose to do so. The other mounted one I've got here is a bit of an anomaly. This was a gift, so this was not chosen. And this has gone mad this year. The number of actual canes it's grown is just ridiculous, with accompanying roots, which are still growing. Still got green tips going on here. And the root system's going all over the place. There's nearly as many round the back and down the sides, and they're growing upwards towards the top. So I'm having difficulty holding this one with one hand. It's highly likely, in fact, highly likely, that this is actually not only two separate plants, but there's actually two different plants on here. I'm dying to see what it does next year. Because last year it had some blooms, and then there was an odd one or two blooms that were just obviously not the same. So I'm waiting to see what's happened. But this has grown well this year, very well. Largest cane there. Now on this plant, that could be the largest cane it's ever going to have. It might not grow much bigger than that. Given the number of canes it's grown and the average size, that one looks like a bit of a monster in amongst these. So that's not a giant Nobile, but it's a prolific one, if that's the right word. Prolific, there we go. Because it produces an awful lot of canes in a given season. So that one's obviously going to bloom next year. And it's behaving itself at the right time of year, because all of the canes have now got their terminal leaf. So it's finished growing leaves. However, it's still fattening up some of the canes here and still pushing its roots out a little bit. So it's still growing a bit. Well, its main growth has gone. And then we get on to those that, hang on, more coffee needed. We're now getting on to the ones that are showing the sort of size you can get. And that's still not the biggest. However, let me just push that one out of the way. This is pushing the limits of Nobiles as a size. If you look at the nursery grown canes here, so although they were fatter than mine, they're not as tall. Now often when you get a Nobile, the nursery grown canes that are normally in full bloom when you buy it, they're in full flood, and it's pretty blooms must have time. And you get the thing and you look at the size of the canes, and unfortunately with Nobiles, a lot of the time that's the largest cane you will ever see on your plant, because you can't replicate the nursery conditions and the types of feed, hormones and growth invigorators and all sorts of stuff that they chuck at the things, plus perfect conditions, and you just can't replicate that. So your canes will always be a little bit smaller. However, on this one, I've beaten the odds, and the canes I've grown are taller. They're not as fat, but these are still fattening up. They've finished growing, again, terminal leaf. But I've grown two really nice canes on here this year. And I've still got a cane. Now, this was out of season last year. So the fact that it's managed to kick back into season that quickly, I'm well impressed, unless it misbehaves, which it could still do. So basically it left the nursery in full bloom, these two canes. One of the new growths on it when I bought it had been broken, and it had a couple of smaller canes that had started to grow last year. Now those are that one and that one, and they matured in the middle of winter, and when spring came they didn't bloom. They may well bloom next spring along with these two, and if that's what happens, boy is that going to be a show. This one's actually got a proper name as well. Sweet Pinky Momoko. And that wasn't its name when I bought it. It was just a, mass-produced Nobile hybrid, basically, which I got from Burnham's, actually, from Sarah last year, middle of the season, August, I think, something like that. I just liked it, and it was the last one as well. And she said, "Oh, that one's got a broken new growth. You might not want that." And I said, "Yeah, but it's got two others. It'll do." It'll pull on, which it did. So that one's hopefully kicked back into correct season. Now, its season might actually be a late spring bloomer naturally, and it might not, but it's a wait and see. This also produced one hell of a root system down in there. Now, strictly speaking, for a Nobile, that pot's too big, believe it or not. You plant that size, that pot's too big. They really do like to be compact and squashed in. They love it. And they'll do better for it. So the problem is they'll refuse to stand up. Even if that was in a smaller pot suited to the plant, perfect for the plant, even if it was a clay pot, it would never stand up. It would be falling over left, right and centre. You'd only have to breathe and it would fall over. So you have to find some mechanism to get the flipping thing to stand up, which is normally a case of putting it inside a larger pot with a nice flat bottom that's heavy. So it takes a lot to get it to fall over then. So that's that one. And then this is what's left of a plant that I've had for years. And it looks a mess. It's a mess because of what happened to it. That was effectively a specimen-sized plant and actually got, it was either a first or a second at a show in its prime when it was actually at its peak. And after it had bloomed, a little bit too long after it had bloomed, it got split. And it got split into three. And two pieces went to other people. And I kept, quite honestly, the tatty piece, which is what all these old canes are all about. This is where they bloomed and haven't been tidied up. They just got strapped together when I potted up the piece. And then in addition to that, as it started to grow and get a root system going after its division, I tore a piece off and sent to Inter. So it's not strictly classed as a division. It was more a grab hold of the big bit, grab hold of the little bit and pull and hope it comes off. So it was a sort of on-the-fly division, which Incer's now got. So this one's starting to come back, but it's not there yet. However, it will bloom next year. Where will it bloom? Let's have a look-see. These old shriveled canes, no. What about this one here, this fat one here? It's bloomed there, and there, and there. So that one could bloom here and here next year. What about this one? That one hasn't bloomed, so that will, in wherever it chooses. This one looks awful because it's got the dreaded leaf problem that we all know about. We've been over that, I'm not doing that today. So this one will bloom. And then we've got the new one here. That's grown on nicely. That will bloom probably. Well, it will. And this one round here will bloom. So we will get some nice blooms on this one. We had two stalled growths. That's called dividing it and potting up the piece at the wrong time of year. Nonetheless, this will bloom nicely next year. And when we get to the point where the buds start showing, I'm going to get my secateurs and take these canes off at the base and that one, leaving the green ones. And suddenly the plant will look nice again. I'm not taking them off now. They're still capable of storing some reserves for the plant to help it get through the winter when some mean person is going to give it no food and hardly any water. So it'll just help it get through that period. It's a whole unit to go through the winter. So there we go. Right, now what am I doing? Well, because they're still fattening up a bit and there's still a bit of root progress, these are still getting some food. Now you've got two watering cycles going on here. You've got the mounted ones. They're coming round to watering every second or third day. Not every day, not anymore. It's too cold at night and the days are short. So that's getting, the two mounted ones get watered, looked at, watered every second or third day. Because a lot of my other mounts are in a growing phase, things like oncidiums, pushing out spikes and all sorts of stuff like that, there's still feed in that water, but it is a bit lower than it has been in the summer with maximum growth. So I'm already reducing the feed down, but I haven't yet stopped it. The ones in the pots, their watering cycle's dropping right off now. Again, shorter days, no heat in here. I've got sun all across here today. Good, doesn't that Nellie Isla look good? Yeah? So this whole end is in the sun, and yesterday I took a layer of shade netting off and the temperature is 20 degrees. The heat's not there anymore. Without the heat and without the day length, they're not using the water in the pots so quick. So my frequency with the pots is now about every 5 or 6 days. So, hooray, I get rests, I get whole days where I don't do anything, magic. Yeah, so their frequency has dropped down. They're still getting some food because some of the other plants in the cycle, things like this, are pushing up growths. And I can't be doing with lots of different feeding cycles. So at the moment they're still getting a bit of food. But everything's food is going to be reduced. My pots were getting fed 3 times, flushed once. Now they get fed once and flushed once. Already, yeah? So, and soon, probably as we come out the end of October, they'll only get 2 flushes and 1 feed. And that feed will be low because they're not going to use it. Their growth will slow down. So that's my sort of feeding and watering. And as far as these are concerned, these will get a natural rest, not a forced rest. So they will find a place where they get some bright light. Yeah, so not in a shady place, as bright as I can get them, up in the roof somewhere. They will naturally cool down out here because that's what happens in here in the winter. You know, my heater only keeps it sort of, I'm going to go up to 13, 14 degrees this year. So that's how cold they'll get. And they will still get a difference between day and nighttime temperatures. So bright light, cool them down a bit because I can, and cut their feed down once to come out the end of October to nothing, providing they finish growing. That's your choice. And the watering frequency then can go right down to ticking over. Don't let them start shriveling. Just turn those off. Yeah, that's shriveled. Yeah, that should take at least 2 years to do that. If you see one like that doing it, it's dehydrating, and that's not what needs to happen. Yeah, even on the previous year, this is a previous year cane, that's not shriveling yet, and it won't this winter either. These are 3, maybe even 4-year-old canes. Yeah, still got a leaf on the top. That's unusual, they usually drop a lot. So these are what you call semi-deciduous. They do lose their leaves eventually, but they should hold their leaves for 2 years, and some will drop some leaves in the 3rd year. Some will wait till the 4th year. Some will spread to dropping their leaves over the 3rd and 4th year. Some, depending on what mix there is, what other types of Dendrobiums are mixed in with the hybrid, might actually start dropping their leaves towards the end of the 2nd year. Yeah, but any canes that you grow in a given season should hold their leaves into the following year at the very least. If you're dropping your leaves sooner than that, there's probably something a little wrong there. So that's the Nobiles, taking them through this period where they've finished growing, but they're still active. As I said, there's still some swelling and storage going on and some root activity going on. So they're not totally resting yet. But they will be soon. You know, within a month, these will be into the rest. And the rest is not long. They start resting into November. They start coming out of it at the beginning of February. And if they start pushing those buds away from the canes earlier than that, they'll come out of it earlier. And we'll do the coming out the other end when we get there. Oh, the anticipation. But that's what Nobiles are all about. Yep, natural growing season, feed and water well, slow them down. Once they finish growing, get them into the winter, try and cool them down a bit if you can. It's not a freeze. This isn't the species, these are hybrids. They've got all sorts of things mixed in with them. And some of them are not cool growers, and some of them might not be resting types either. That's why the hybrids are more tolerant of the winter care. And the chances are they're going to bloom anyway. But if you can increase the light without being silly and cut the feed down once they stop growing, reduce the watering frequency without shriveling the canes, and drop the temperatures down a bit, they're going to bloom. and they should bloom very well depending on how well you can do those items. If you can't increase the light, they'll still bloom. You might not get quite as many flowers, or they might not have the depth of colour. And also the depth of colour, they say, so again, not me, they say, is geared up to how cool they get. And if they don't get cool enough, the colours will be a little wishy-washy. And some say the blooms won't be as big either. You'd have to do trial and error. I'm not doing trial and error on that. Mine are going to bloom how they wish to do so. And that'll be it. So that's a chat about the Nobile types, and a little bit about trying to identify the Nobile style of cane. To say they tend to have a sheath and a bare bit, sheath, bare bit. The sheath is in effect the base of the leaf, yeah? Base of the leaf is where that ring is, yeah? And then it opens outwards. They alternate up the cane without exception, and their terminal leaf will be a leaf at the top that just doesn't flare out as much as the others. It tends to stay more upright, and often a bit smaller than the others as well. So there you go. And often a nodule at the base, followed by a very thin cane, gradually getting wider and wider and wider. Sometimes the nodes kink and get like a little bit of a Z shape going on here. Sometimes they're dead straight, but they do tend to have like a little bend in them as they produce a new leaf, certainly in the area where they're fatter anyway. And that would be a good size Nobile. I've seen bigger. I haven't got a tape measure. I'm no good with foreign. I would say that cane is around, that's about 30 centimetres, 50, 55 centimetres I would say, heading up towards 2 feet, something like that. And that's a good size cane for a Nobile, but I've seen bigger. Yeah. So always look at what you buy and think it could get bigger. A lot of the time it won't, but when it does, you know, you've got to allow for the size. And with Nobiles, your size is based on height. They're not a wide plant, they're a tall plant. This one has been allowed to be a wide plant because of where it was cut from. This was a great big bush, and this is like one side of it, so the canes had been pushed out sideways from the centre part, and all that's left of that centre part now are those old canes. So there we go. That's a look at some Dendrobium nobiles coming to the end of their growing season. Well, they're at the end of their growing season, going into the period where they don't produce new growths, or it's very rare. And you might get that. You get middle of December, and everything's all quiet on the eastern front, or the western front, one of those fronts, and you see a new cane starting, and you panic, and you think, oh, what am I going to do now? Am I going to have to start feeding? No. That new cane at that time of year is going to grow so slowly, it will not drain the resources of the plant. Leave it be. Yeah, it's probably never going to mature properly because it won't have got far enough by the time the growing season starts to actually get its full vigour. So it will probably always be a smaller cane. But yeah, don't panic. If your plant has stopped growing and gone into the rest period, it will come out when it's ready, and sometimes it will produce a growth at a very odd time. Often if it's a little bit too warm, that might happen. Occasionally, Nobiles will grow kikis, but it's not natural. They are not classed as kiki machines. The only one I can think of is that flipping the Stardust Firebird thing that has the gorgeous orange flowers, masses of them. That's a kiki machine, and I suspect that is nothing more than it's not getting the right care. There's something in its makeup that either makes it a very cool grower or a very warm grower, and it isn't getting it. And its genes are just muddled up, because it is quite a complex hybrid, that one. And it's still classed as a Nobile type, even though there's not a lot of Nobile actually in it. It's got all sorts of other weird and wonderful things in it, but and that's the problem with the Nobile hybrids. You know, it's finding out what else is in there. Do you even need to know? But I'll finish off with this, just remember that Dendrobium nobile is a species. And like Highlander, there can be only one. Its traits are passed into all of these hybrids in some shape or form. And a species needs a proper rest and a good cool down or it won't bloom. However, some of the other things that get mixed in with that to produce these hybrids are not so fussy, which means the hybrids aren't so fussy. That fussiness has been bred out of them basically. So there you go. And it's often the first Dendrobium that somebody will ever get, and they might get hooked on them and thinking, I like these, I'll have some of these, I can grow these and I can bloom them well. Well then go for it. There are many colours from pure white right through to the deepest reds, deepest purples, lovely golden throats, green throats, combinations of, and even some yellow ones like the prima donna there, although the yellows are less common. But all the different shades of pinks and purples into deep colours, all through the pinks out towards the reds. Don't tend to get oranges very often, but I have seen some with orange tinges on. So you've got a good colour range there as well. And there is a bit of variety in the plant size and there is a bit of variety in the bloom size. But like many orchids, not just dendrobiums, if you have big blooms, you don't tend to get so many. If you have smaller blooms, you get stacks. Just think of the cattleyas, you know. Some of the cattleya blooms are so big you're lucky to ever get two. One or two you get. And others you'll get a cluster of a dozen or more, but they're not as big. So anyway, that's Nobiles. I like them, but I'm not swamping the place with them. I mean, if you look, there's 5 there. They're all different. There are similarities. From memory, I think the bloom on this one, whatever it's called, and the Comet King, and this one are similar. Yeah? So there are some similarities. That one is unique in this place, basically. The colour of the shade of yellow with the little pink tinges, that's, you know, that is a unique Dendrobium colour-wise in my collection. And this one, I can't remember. There you go. But all I will say with the Nobile types, hybrids, is that they're not too fussy. You don't need to be that fussy with them. And they're rewarding in as much as by not having to worry about that fussiness with the full winter rest nonsense, which some have to have. The Nobile hybrids can do without parts of it, and to some extent some of them will do without any of it, apart from reducing the feed and the watering. They need that. They need a time to sort of gather themselves together ready for the blooming. Yeah? Look at it like that. And during that time when they're gathering themselves together and thinking, right, next thing, I've got all my strength now, I've spent all that season growing these canes, I've got a good root system, the next thing I'm going to do is bloom. But I'm not going to bloom in the middle of the winter because there's no pollinators around, so we'll wait a bit. And that period there, just adjust your watering and feeding. And I'll see you next time. You know, this has got me thinking about spring now. Spring is their time. Late winter, spring is the Nobiles' time, along with many other dendrobiums and other types of orchids as well. But specifically these, you don't see them in bloom very often out of that period unless they've been force grown by the mass producers, in which case they're in bloom anytime you like. You can have them in bloom in November in the shops, you know, so they manage to get them to bloom any time of year. We tend to hopefully get them into a seasonal growth pattern where they're predictable again, which sometimes, I mean, that's the fastest I've ever done one. It can often take 2 and sometimes 3 years to kick that proper seasonal growth back into them, because they've just been forced out of it basically. So there we go, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.